His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava ki Namacharya Srila Hridas Thakur ki Friends of Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sri Krishna Gaura Bhaktivinoda ki Sri Sri Radha Krishna Gopinath Shyamaka Radha Govind Giri Govardhan ki Vrindavan Dham ki Mathura Dham ki Navadip Dham ki Mayapur Dham ki Raghunath Puri Dham ki Yamuna Mai ki Ganga Mai ki Tulasi Devi ki Bhakti Devi ki Samveda Bhaktivinda ki all glories to the Assembly of Lords. All glories to the Assembly of Lords. All glories to the Assembly of Lords. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 So we're very happy to be here in New Mayapur Dham. It's been a long time. I think I was here in the 90s sometime. But never here with Prabhupada, unfortunately. And there are no films of Prabhupada here, right? No movies. Unfortunately. So I've been asked to speak a little bit about Prabhupada. And we all know our own stories best coming to Krishna consciousness. If you allow me, I'll speak about our journey. was in college at the University of California in 1961 to 64. Huge turmoil. People were taking, lots of drugs. Drugs started coming in at that time. I remember walking with Srila Prabhupada on the Berkeley campus where I went to school. And I told him that we passed the clock tower, very famous landmark at University of California, Berkeley. And I mentioned to Prabhupada that they had to put up glass panels to keep students from jumping off, because they were committing suicide. And Prabhupada told the story. When he heard that, he told the story of the Himalayas giving birth. The rumor went around that the Himalayas was about to give birth. And so the villagers crowded around this one cave. They were waiting for days and days. Nothing happened. And finally the mountain started rumbling. And some little rats ran out. So Prabhupada compared that, the rats, to the students of the big university. They're producing mice-like men with no qualification. And I also felt like that, of course. So I wasn't really looking for religion, but it came to me. I was serving in Malaysia in the Peace Corps for 3 years, 1965 to 68. And I came back to America and they wanted to send me to Vietnam. So I didn't want to go back to Southeast Asia. And at the time, devotees were trying to get out of the armed forces. And Prabhupada pretty much gave permission for that, because it was an unjust war, number one, and those who are seeking spiritual life are not really qualified to fight. They're generally Brahminically inclined. So I got out of the army with a letter from these Peace Corps psychiatrists saying I was mentally unfit for combat, which was true. So I took that downtown Los Angeles, that letter downtown Los Angeles, to the induction center. I was called up to go in the army. And I gave the letter to the officer. He looked at it and he saw my Peace Corps record, so he was actually a little sympathetic. And he looked at the letter, he said, "This is fine, you can go home." So I walked out the door and the first thing I heard was the Harinam party across the street. I think it was Vishnu John Swami. It must have been Vishnu John Swami, because he was coming downtown Los Angeles 8 and 10 hours a day. Different places in Los Angeles. Also Hollywood Boulevard was a famous place for Harinam. So when I heard the mantra, I felt a subtle shift. It's described that when the mantra enters the ear, it goes to the heart. So I felt something happen, very subtle. And then I walked away. It was such a strange sight to see devotees, shaved head, women in saris, jumping up and dancing on the streets of major cities. That was just a sight to behold. It was amazing. So that caused a lot of attention. Prabhupada actually knew how to preach very quickly. Although the Westerners didn't know what was going on, at least they heard the mantra. And they couldn't avoid that. And when that mantra is heard, it's a seed that's planted. And that seed may take a long time to fruct, it may take a short time, but it's there. So that's the process for this age, introduced by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And when Prabhupada first went to India, that was the main business also. Although a little later on, he didn't want the devotees to go out so much in Harinam, because he thought that the Indians may think they're just begging. But anyway, initially, I mentioned last night yesterday in the slideshow, that Prabhupada sent his disciples and accompanied them to major cities around the country, around India, and had huge programs. And I mentioned also that they were traveling by train mostly, and when the train stopped, the Harinam party, the devotees would jump off and have Harinam at each and every station. So very quickly, the whole of India, because hundreds of people would immediately gather. We know what happens in India when something unusual is going on. A huge group of people gather quickly. So very quickly also in India, the word spread of the Western Vaishnavas coming to their shores. And after hundreds of years of subjugation, finally, on the perdition of the Muslims, finally Vaishnavas come to their shores. So it was an amazing time. I was fortunate to be a part of that. But to go back a little bit, Vishaka Devi and I were in photo school, we were boyfriend, girlfriend, and both studying photography. I was in the master's degree program, she was an undergraduate. And all of a sudden one day we got a phone call from the editor of Asia magazine. He wanted a story on the Hare Krishna movement in New York City. So we went there. This was 2.5 years after I initially heard the chanting on the streets in Los Angeles. So we went to the downtown New York City, found the devotees and asked them if we could come back to the temple to do the article. So they were very happy to hear that. Invited us back. And immediately I like to say that I first met Prabhupada through his potency. Through the temples he established, through his devotees, prasadam, the philosophy, everything. Actually appealed to me very much on that first entrance into the temple. And Vishaka Devi had the opposite reaction. She was an atheist. So anyway, we went back to school. That was the summer of 1970. Went back to school in fall of 1971. And I had to do a master's thesis, so I chose the subject, Krishna consciousness in India. So I went to meet Prabhupada in India in December 1970. And on our first meeting, I asked him if I could stay and photograph the devotees and travel with the party. So Prabhupada looked at me, he said, "Are you going to become a devotee?" Because I was, mustache and long hair. And I said, "I don't think so, Prabhupada." Because I couldn't imagine shaving my head and wearing robes. So Prabhupada gave a very startling answer. He said, "Then you cannot stay." So I come 10,000 miles and I can't stay. What to do? So I spent the night there in where Prabhupada was staying, the devotees were staying. I got up the next morning, nobody said anything, and I stayed for 2 months traveling. So Prabhupada, that was a lesson. Many times when he speaks, there's many layers of meaning. So initially he said I could not stay, but then he allowed me the next day. So I took that to mean if we don't become devotees, if we don't become Krishna conscious, then we can't stay long term. We may be physically in the presence of devotees, but if we're not making advancement, then that's almost like not being there. So we traveled with Prabhupada for 2 months, and then Vishaka came, her name was Jean at that time, And she wanted to do an article on a quaint Indian village untouched by Western technology, a photo essay. So we asked Prabhupada where to go, and he said, everywhere you go, you'll get your camera stolen and they will cheat you. Then he said, best to go to Vrindavan. So that was the perfect strategy to help Jean, Vishaka Devi, become a devotee, because she was an atheist. And she didn't have a good experience initially at the temple in New York City. So Prabhupada knew how to handle everyone in terms of preaching. I remember my father met Prabhupada twice. And my father was a history professor. So Prabhupada engaged his knowledge of history in talking about the history of the British in India. So my father had a very pleasant meeting. And later on helped us a lot with our film work. So I have a few, get my phone here. Excuse me, sorry about this. I'll just continue with the narrative and a few stories. So we stayed for actually 2.5 years in India. Vishaka became initiated in Vrindavan. I was initiated in Calcutta. The same initiation ceremony as Janani Prabhu. That was October 1971. And then I met Prabhupada in December of that last year. And when Vishaka came, she was brand new. So it took time for her to become interested in Krishna consciousness. And she was initiated and we were married in Vrindavan, November 1971. So we started traveling with Prabhupada all over India. And it was an amazing time. As I said, the people of India were very excited to see the Western Vaishnavas. Sometimes there was suspicion the government of India claimed we were CIA at one point and tried to do an investigation. So I have some categories that I want to talk about with Srila Prabhupada, how he was encouraging. Just like with myself, I would sit in Prabhupada's room during those initial 2 months and take pictures. And when anybody came in, Prabhupada would introduce me. He would say, this is Mr. John. He is an expert photographer, and he is appreciating our Krishna consciousness movement. So that was very encouraging. Also how he encouraged Vishaka Devi to become a devotee. There's a few stories about Prabhupada as a preacher. Prabhupada was leaving for Russia in 1971. And when he was going, Brahmananda Prabhu, he said, Prabhupada, you can't go. It's mango season here in India. So Prabhupada's reply was, preaching in the snows of Russia is sweeter than any mango. I remember going up in the elevator in the skyscraper building in New York City with Prabhupada. And he looked at all of us in the elevator while going up, and he said, I want the privilege of fighting for Krishna. This is in 1976. Prabhupada was starting to become ill at that time. Prabhupada never gave up, as we can see. He continued his translation right to the very end. So inspiring. We filmed that Prabhupada translating on his bed. We always thought that should be there in the films. Actually, it was controversial when Your Ever Well Wisher was released. That was our first biography on the life of Srila Prabhupada. So it shows Prabhupada lying down in a very weak condition, translating. So when that film first came out, it was actually banned in some parts of ISKCON, some zones, because the leaders felt it wasn't appropriate to show Prabhupada like that. But now it's wide open. And the public especially appreciates to see Prabhupada doing the same thing his whole life, translating the books. He's so dedicated. It's very inspiring to see that for anyone. And I remember Prabhupada at practically every lecture he gave in India, he stressed to the Indian people, become Krishna conscious and spread it all over the world. It's that famous verse. One who has taken birth as a human being in the land of India should make his life successful and work for the benefit of all people. So this is what Prabhupada did. He did what he preached. So Prabhupada was at the same time, very humorous in his dealings. Sometimes he would tell Bengali jokes that we couldn't understand. But Prabhupada was laughing so hard, we laughed along with him. There's one story, it took place in Hyderabad. There's one Guru Maharajji, a self-proclaimed God. Actually, his mother said he was God. And so he was quite famous. And some articles came out in the New York Times about him and Indian newspapers. So an article came out actually that he arrived at one engagement and some little old lady, maybe this person, I forget. Anyway, she had a pie and she threw it in his face. And I told Prabhupada that. Actually, let me start again. Prabhupada was asking, how do we understand that Krishna is God? So there were some answers that he displayed his universal form, and so on. A few answers came out. And Prabhupada didn't accept any of them. But then I told Prabhupada this story about this pie being thrown in the face of Guru Maharaj. He said, yes, this is proof that he's not God. So a reporter at the Bhaktivedanta Manor, she came in to interview Prabhupada. And she was wearing a miniskirt. So the first question she asked was, Prabhupada, why do you shave your head? And Prabhupada's reply was, why do you have bare legs? And he said, you have to have a cool head to understand Krishna consciousness. So some stories about lessons and instructions. Every day Prabhupada would take a morning walk in Bombay along the seacoast at Worli. Maybe you've been there, you know that area, right on the sea. And one lady would drive him every day. And one day she said, Prabhupada, I have an investment. I feel you should invest some money and make lots of money. And then your students won't have to go door to door begging. So Prabhupada said, no, I don't want that. I'm not interested. He said, I want them to beg. I want them to go through that austerity of preaching. That's a lesson for all of us. Actually, whatever we're due in this life will come to us as far as wealth or whatever. That's sometimes hard to understand because two people can be doing the same thing and one becomes to try to make money, one becomes rich and the other stays poor. But there's so many variables. We know that for every action there's 5 factors of action. And the last factor is the supersoul, whether he sanctions or not. And this, all of us are controlled by the different modes of material nature. The circumstances are different. So there's so many variables. There's many stories how Prabhupada was very personal and caring. Especially sometimes with the ladies, they would be sometimes neglected in those early days. So we had the premiere of our Hare Krishna People movie in Prabhupada's room in Mayapur. It was in 1974, the Gorpurnim Festival. So Prabhupada's room in Mayapur is very small, we all know that. And it was completely packed, that premiere showing. And there were GBC, sannyasis sitting next to Prabhupada's temple presidents. And Vishaka was outside. We both made the film, but she was standing outside. She couldn't come in. So Prabhupada noticed her, and he motioned her to come in. So she came in and sat down next to Prabhupada because Prabhupada had the sannyasis move aside. And then he looked at them and he said, "Ladies first." So this is Prabhupada's caring for his, being very attentive to everything, caring for the ladies. And then one of the places we went those first 2 months was the Kumbh Mela. And I was taking pictures of everything, all the exotic sadhus and devotees bathing in the Ganga, Triveni. And I started to take pictures of the ladies bathing, which was a mistake. Because some of the army came down, grabbed my camera, and took me to a tent and handcuffed me to the pole. They said I shouldn't. Well, they thought I was taking just pictures of the ladies, and wasn't permitted. So they asked me some questions, and I said I was with Prabhupada's party, and so they went to Prabhupada and asked him, "Who is this person?" And Prabhupada said he is a very good person. Actually, Prabhupada sent a note. That's what happened. He said, "Mr. John is with our party. He is a very good devotee. Please release him." So Prabhupada saved me. Actually, he's saving all of us if we follow his instructions. Another very personal story is that in the very last days in Rishikesh, Prabhupada went to Rishikesh in April 1977 to try to regain his health. And I was massaging him at night. The room was completely dark. I was outside the mosquito net with my hands inside massaging. And then Prabhupada said, "There's a mosquito in the net. Please remove him." And it was dark. So it was a single wide bed. I was extremely nervous and uncomfortable. I don't know if I ever got the mosquito out, but I tried. So at that time, Prabhupada asked me, "When did you come to Krishna consciousness?" And I told him. And then he asked me, "Who came first, your wife or yourself?" And I said, "I came first." So Prabhupada seemed to give that significance. Because later on, 10 months later, when Prabhupada was quite ill in Vrindavan, Vishaka Devi and I were trying to film him, translating on his bed. And there was objection from Tamal Krishna Goswami. He didn't want that to be done. He didn't want us to show Prabhupada in that condition. So we were hanging out kind of day after day, trying to get in the room. So finally Tamal Krishna Goswami brought us in the room, and we spoke to Prabhupada. And Tamal Krishna Goswami started praising Vishaka Devi about her work, her articles. She's an amazing writer, prolific writer. And then Prabhupada said something interesting. He said, but Yadubara came first. And Prabhupada remembered that for months and months. This was like 8 months ago. Prabhupada never forgot anything. Always, so sharp and encouraging. Let's see here. Another example of Prabhupada's practicality. We were riding in an old Dodge American car, big Dodge American car, from Mayapur to Birnagar. Birnagar is the place where Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur lived. And Lalit Prasad was there, his son, at that time. So the car didn't have a horn, and that was the problem, because when you drive in India, you must have a horn. Otherwise it's very dangerous. So anyway, Prabhupada said, give me one plate. And we stopped and got a stick. So Prabhupada showed us, he held the plate outside the window and banged on it with a stick. And that was the horn. What else? There are many times where Prabhupada, displayed his mystic potency, we can say. Many times Indians would ask Prabhupada, can you show us some mystic power, some mystic city? Because they were used to other gurus producing some gold or what do they call it, ash. Prabhupada wasn't interested in that cheap, impressing people in that cheap way. So whenever Prabhupada was asked that, he indicated his devotees. He said, this is my miracle. This is my mystic city, to make Westerners into Vaishnavas. That's the difficult thing, to change a person's consciousness. These other things, what are you going to do with more gold? Just become more attached. So another incredible event was the second big Hanul program in Bombay. And that was in 1973, or not, 73, yeah. So Prabhupada was actually circumambulating the deities at the end of the program. There was a big kirtan going on. And Prabhupada came around for the third time. When he came around that third time, he started dancing. And he lifted his arms up. And the whole crowd of 20,000 people rose up off their feet. And Vishaka and I had the same impression. We could actually almost see the karmic reaction, release of karma from that audience. It was like a big whoosh. We actually felt it. So Prabhupada was incredibly powerful like that. And then we know the struggle that Prabhupada went through in Juhu to secure the property. And of course we know that Mr. Nair met with an unfortunate demise, his death. I went to visit Prabhupada soon after that happened. I was in Mumbai and I went to Calcutta to see him. He just arrived back from South India, the South Indian tour. And I went into Prabhupada's room and he started talking about Mumbai. I was alone with him. And he said something very powerful, very extraordinary. He started talking about Mr. Nair. He said the man was such a rascal that I prayed to Lord Nrsingadev that he'd be punished. And I was quite stunned. So some devotee later on said, I thought the Vaishnavas don't curse anyone. Prabhupada didn't curse anyone, he simply prayed to his Lord to do whatever. And we know that actually happened because he died prematurely. So this person tried to cheat Prabhupada. You don't cheat an empowered acharya. That's a very dangerous position. We know the story of King Nriga in the Krishna book, how he gave 2 cows to one cow to 2 Brahmin. Anyway, he was cursed and he had to, his lifespan was shortened and so many things happened. The same thing as Mr. Nair. So that's a very great lesson, not to offend Vaishnavas. Another time we were in Srila Prabhupada's room in Washington, D.C. At that time, there was a lot of talk from the Bhaktivedanta Institute, the scientific branch of ISKCON. The devotees were discussing about different scientific ideas. And then discussion came up about the moonshot, whether they went to the moon or not. We know Prabhupada's stance on that. So the next morning at Mangalarti, Prabhupada's servant came up to Vishaka and I in Mangalarti and said, Prabhupada wants to see you. So we went into Prabhupada's room and there was one small light on his desk shining. And Prabhupada had his elbows on the table in front of him with his chin in his hands, with his eyes closed. And we sat down, paid obeisances, and we looked up at Prabhupada. He looked at us, he glanced up and he said, take it from me, they didn't go. And I don't know why he chose us to say that. They didn't go to the moon. So anyway, that was interesting. To end, I'll just read a letter that Prabhupada wrote about our film work. My dear Yadubara, please accept my blessings. I am in due receipt of your letter dated December 16th, 1974. And I have noted the contents carefully. I just saw your film last night. It was very nice. This is a film on food distribution in Mayapur. Prabhupada writes, we can collect a lot of money with this film for ISKCON food relief program, but not a single farthing of that money should be used for any other thing. It should all go to our ISKCON food relief fund. Nothing else. Otherwise, we will definitely run into trouble, such as Hansaduten had in Germany. So that was a lesson that we should have followed, because later on devotees were collecting for different programs to feed hungry children or whatever. It was going for other things. And that caused some problems. So Prabhupada continues, as far as your future films are concerned, I do not think it is possible for the BBT to continue financing these films. BBT is strictly for construction of temples and printing books. So Prabhupada actually gave us $16,000 from his book fund to produce our first film. So sometimes he would break that rule. And from that we know that Prabhupada understood the value of media. Back then, people were mad after movies, and today they're even more mad after movies. People are reading a lot less. So we'd like to encourage everyone to especially try to show the Hare Krishna movie on Prabhupada's life to as many as possible, because it has an emotional impact, even on outsiders that don't have any experience with Krishna consciousness. That was our, we saw that happen time and time again. After the film was released, Vishaka Devi and I traveled to many countries for the premieres. And the film opened in 38 countries in movie theaters. So it was very, very popular. And Prabhupada also said, make these Krishna conscious films the most popular. So that's a big order. And encouraging the younger generation to take up that order, because we're getting on in age. And one of the things that's very much needed is script writers. Because every movie is based on the script. That's the foundation of any movie. So we lack writers. There's so much discussion about making a movie on the Bhagavatam, making a movie on the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, but we need script writers for that. And that's probably the most difficult part of filmmaking, is a good script. So thank you very much. I feel very inadequate speaking in front of you. I hope I gave something of value today. Do you have any questions or comments? Yes.
Yeah, I was listening to a class this morning and Prabhupada was talking about Mr. John. And now I know it's
Where was the class?
I can't remember. I think it might have been Vrindavan or Calcutta. I can't remember. I think it was India. Yeah, he was talking about Mr. John.
Yeah, that's me.
And the other thing is, you mentioned that when Prabhupada was in the Pandal program, he was circumambulating the deities, and then the third time around he raised his hands and started dancing. And then you mentioned how all the people in the audience also got up and danced, and you felt this like karmic release from everything. I remember, were you in my problem with the Panchatattva were installed?
Yeah.
Remember when they opened the curtains for the first darshan?
Yeah.
That was not of this world.
I know.
Just the sound that came out of the devotees was like, I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it. It was like a roar from
I
the
agree.
spiritual realm.
That was incredible.
What was your reflections on that?
Well, actually, I was leading kirtan at that time. About an hour before, I was leading kirtan, and Bibi Govinda Maharaj comes up, and Shiva Ramaswamy comes. All the big kirtaniyas, and I kept asking them to take over, motioning them, and they said, no, go ahead. So when the deities opened, I was just completely, I don't know how I kept going. That was incredible. Yeah.
It's such an experience.
Huh.
But what do you think that sound was? I mean, what's your thought on that? I was just like, I couldn't believe that. Almost knocked me off the altar.
It was ecstasy. Ecstasy.
That's the real deal.
Yeah. Anything else? All right, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.